So to start with the biscuit method, we're going to put together, as usual, sifting our flour and our baking soda together into the dish. And we're going to add our salt in here too. Sift everything through. And then we can add more flour as we need it, or as it fits rather, into our sifter. And once our dry ingredients are sifted together, we can then add our sugar. And I'm just going to take a whisk and mix all of that together. Next, I add my cold butter that's been cut up into cubes or strips. The biscuit method implies that you can make biscuits, or as we in Ireland call them, scones. And that is the only thing we use this method for. That couldn't be further from the truth. This method for making a dough can be used for pie dough, it can be used for scones, biscuits, it can be used for puff pastry. So it's a very, very versatile way to combine our ingredients. First thing I do is start to break my butter down into the flour and sugar. I'm just taking my butter and pressing it between my fingers with some flour on my hands as well, to make sure that these guys all turn into little, firstly I'm looking for little flat strips of butter that I can then work more easily into something that's going to resemble breadcrumbs. And as I'm working these through, they're going to get considerably smaller. The reason we're using cold butter with this guy is very simple. If we were to use warm butter, our butter will melt and basically stick our flour together. With our butter being cold, our butter will just break up and break down into smaller pieces, which will give us that texture that I was talking about, that kind of breadcrumb or sandy or cornmeal, any of those kind of textures. As your butter begins to break down, you can then start to take your butter and run your butter through your hands, and that will help to break down uniformly all of your butter strips that you have broken down. Okay, so again, just taking your butter, rubbing it through your hands like so. And what you'll notice as well, the longer this goes on, the color will change slightly in your flour. It will go from something that was very, very white to start with, or as white as flour is to start with. And when it gets encased in the butter, it will take on, your mixture in your bowl will take on something of a golden color. And you just keep doing this until you end up with no butter visible, and no butter strips, a feel of those butter strips in your mixture. And once I have no chunks of butter left in my mixture, I'm good to add my my liquids. And I'm just going to whisk my liquids together. Once I have them nicely incorporated, Once I have my liquids nicely incorporated together, I'm going to make a little well in the center of my my butter and dry ingredients mixture, and just pour in my liquid. I'm then going to start on the outside and start to push that mixture together with my hand before I take a spatula and start to just basically mix everything together. The last thing I want here is to overmix this dough while it's in the bowl. So I'm going to be very gentle and kind of semi-fold everything together. And you'll see it will start to turn into something kind of rough and shaggy pretty quickly. Once we get to here, we're almost ready to take it out onto the table. A good way to check, I find, is to put your spatula to one side, take some of your dough, and if you can press it together and it holds into a ball, that's kind of mixed enough, okay? So I'm just going to take a couple of seconds with my hands and just press all of the loose flour into this dough so I get a nice homogeneous ball. And once I have that ball, as I said, it's going to look kind of rough and shaggy, which is fine. But once I have that ball in my bowl, I can then tip that out onto my table. So to put that to one side for a second, I'm going to take some flour and I'm just going to flour my table, like so. Quite generous with your flour. You don't know how liquid this dough is going to be. You don't know how it's going to take up that flour. So all I'm going to do then, take my bowl, take my dough out onto the table, and then just gently fold all of my dough together into something that is a nice, relatively smooth ball. Okay. I'm now going to leave this dough like so for 5 minutes, and I'm going to come back and roll out my dough. So after my 5 minutes, I'm just going to flour gently the top of my dough, press it down slightly, and take my rolling pin and just gently roll out my dough. Once it's at a thickness that's more or less uniform and I am more or less happy with, I'm going to stop rolling. And I'm just going to take a pastry cutter, gently flour the cutter, okay, so that it won't stick to the scones, and then press through, twist when it reaches the bottom, and you get your perfect scone. Okay, again, cutter on top, press through. Once you reach your table, twist, press, pop out your scone. Okay, the reason I'm putting these cuts so close together is because we don't want to have to re-roll our dough. The reason we don't re-roll our dough is very simple. The more you roll your dough, the more gluten you develop. And the more gluten you develop, the tougher your scone is going to be at the end. So now that I've finished cutting out all of those, and I have 9 scones, I just gently press my dough back together. And again, just using it to clean up some flour on my table rather than adding more flour underneath. Press it down again. And just return to cutting my dough. Press it together, press it down. And if you see now, when I press my dough and I take my hand away, my dough begins to contract again. This is a really good sign that my dough is overworked. So to be honest, I don't want to do anything with this dough. Okay, certainly not right now. I can leave it rest for a little bit longer before I cut my scones out of that dough. So I'm just going to put that to one side for now. And I'm going to take my tray of scones. I'm going to take a brush. And I'm going to take some egg wash. So egg wash, very simple, equal amounts of milk and eggs mixed together. And I'm just going to gently brush the top of my scones with my egg wash. And I'm now going to leave these sit. Once they've been washed, they can sit for 5 minutes. And then I will come back and egg wash them again. So in that 5-minute resting period, I managed to get 2 more scones out of the excess dough. And now I can put that to one side. And I'm just going to brush the new guys and all of the rest of my dough, or all of the rest of my scones also. And once they've all been washed, they're now going to go to the oven. Thanks for watching the video, folks. If you like what you saw, please give me a like and a subscribe, share the video with your friends, and remember to check back often because I'll be posting videos regularly on my site. In the meantime, happy baking!